And I'm not letting go. So, hello, internet family. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib, and you are listening. To Monday Night Quarterback. So, as I promised Friday night, I am here again tonight, and I'm continuing in the theme of. I'm continuing in the theme of spiritual abuse. So tonight I'm going to take a little bit of a different turn because I'm going to discuss how people like to, a lot of pastors here lately who are guilty of this type of behavior are invoking freedom of religion. So I'm going to talk about using the separation of church and state to justify abuse. And I've noticed with most of the pastors that do this, there seems to be an overwhelming majority of them that want to use it to justify sexual violence or domestic violence or marital rape, or just flat out committing sexual sin against the female members of their church. And a lot of people want to justify a behavior like that by saying, well, I believe it's okay to do it. Well, when you're talking about freedom of religion, religious freedom, there's more to it than because I had a pastor who wound up later on being guilty of some of the same stuff that used to say you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. We look every day at groups like white supremacists. There was just another mass shooting, and that person believed that they were right in doing it. I remember the days of people bombing abortion clinics. And here recently, when Roe v. Wade got overturned, someone bombed one of the pregnancy centers that many Christians use as ministry to talk to counsel women out of getting abortions, or at least they say, and I volunteered for one of those places. And, it was supposed to give information on abortion. I tend to like to be a little straightforward. And so when I talk to people and I was, counseling with many of those places, I would tell them, well, we're here to give information about abortion. We don't perform abortions, but what we do is offer free pregnancy testing, free ultrasounds, and we offer information to you about resources that are available should you keep your child. And, that would help you keep your child. So we don't perform them. And, I was a little, like I said, I was a little more direct with the people that I talked to, because one thing I have noticed if you're going to be emotionally intelligent, the Word of God says that he that wins souls is wise. And I've always told people the purpose of certain things is, yes, we do ultimately want you to keep your baby. We also offer adoption services, or the names of adoption attorneys, should you want to carry your pregnancy to term. So we really don't exist to help you abort. Now, if it were left up to me, like many of the pro-abortion places, like Planned Parenthood, we would offer other services, like gynecological care and different, because Planned Parenthood does the full service. They don't just exist to perform abortions, and I think that's where a lot of people get that wrong. And because I've, procured these services of both types of agencies, well, I volunteered in one, and in the hometown where I grew up in, if we wanted information on sex education, I remember seeing, because I follow Pink on Instagram, and she talked about Planned Parenthood being one of the few places that teenage girls could go to and receive objective um, objective sex education, that pretty much there was nobody like coercing you to get on birth control pills. There was nobody coercing you to do anything you didn't want to do. If anything, one of the things that they would do is they would painstakingly give, they would painstakingly make sure that you were ready to be, they would ask questions to make sure that you were ready to be having sex in the first place, because they pretty much knew what you were there for. You were there to get birth control pills. And they wanted to make sure that you they not only educated you on birth control, but they educated you on your lady parts, which means they also did annual PAPs. They're the one way that that underage girls could get an annual pap smear every year. They also did breast examinations when they, the whole gamut when you come in for a examination. So there was more to them than just performing abortions. Performing, and only a select few of their clinics do that. And I don't think that's what people understand. And to be perfectly honest with you, keeping, in touch with them and going for their services pretty much helped me and a lot of young ladies make some pretty wise decisions about whether or not the guys we were dealing with were worth us going and getting birth control in the first place. So they painstakingly would ask you questions to make sure that you were ready for the decision that you were making, because many times you aren't. Okay, many times you aren't. Many women aren't. I did a Google search on women who wind up having sex against their will. And I'm not just talking about sexual assault. I'm not just talking about rape or different other stuff. I'm talking about women who feel pressured to have consensual sex, which really is a form of coercion, because they felt like if they didn't do it, they would lose their boyfriend. Or husband or mate. And many of you have heard the very, very unwise advice of what you don't do, another woman will. And, being a woman, being a black woman, I don't care what category a man says you fall into. I don't ever think it's wise to give in sexually just because someone uses the threat of other women. You don't know. For one thing, I grew up with a lot of male cousins. And one of the things that some of them would tell me, especially on my dad's side, was you can believe about 5% of what you hear when guys are talking smack about scoring with women, because they lie. And many times they will lie on you. I had guys lie on me when I was younger. When I was younger, I had more of a Coca-Cola bottle than I did my current 2-liter. And because of that, if you're an attractive enough woman, many guys want to make it look like they're, hitting it with you. And so I can't tell you how many times I had to check men for lying and saying they got together with me when they didn't. Now, people will say, well, can't be that many men lying. It can be a whole lot of men lying when it's really, when you're talking about teenage boys. because just like teenage girls are seen all kind of different ways depending on, girls get slut shamed even when they're not having sex. They get prude shamed and called the ice queen. Like, it's almost like as a woman you can't really win for losing, because if you aren't putting out when a man wants you to put out, then you're seen as a prude or the ice queen or all these other names. And then when you bring racial ethnicity into it, it gets even murkier. Because, like I told someone, in my experience, white guys are ruder than black men are. Okay? Black men still have that safety. With black men, there's still the safety net of consequences. Then they'll press, depending on the woman, they'll press. But if they think that law enforcement is going to get involved somehow, or that there are going to be some consequences for their actions, they tend to back off. White guys, because of the problem of not having to deal with consequences, because law enforcement is your color, judges are your color, and different other people are your color, there tends to be more of a sense of entitlement, especially if it's a woman that they don't view has the same powers they do, which would be women of color. I did an article summary when I was studying for my undergrad, and one of the things that it talked about was rape across racial lines. And an interesting thing with black women were the least likely to be believed when it came to us reporting sexual assault or rape. White women were more likely, because there is a racial hierarchy. Now, I'm not saying that you need to cooperate with it. Acknowledging that a racial hierarchy exists does not mean to go into defeatism and be like, dang, well, we may as well throw up our hands. No, it's a way of knowing, where you stand racially when it comes to different things in this country, so you know how to fight. So white women, although white women were more likely to be believed is if the perpetrator was black or a man of color. Where white women had a difficult time was with white men. White women were less likely to be believed if the perpetrator was white. So that kind of shows you what kind of power structure we're working with when it comes to how much white guys can get away with. And the whole issue of entitlement. So you now have white men in the religious world and black men who are now, the religions that are the most known for sexual abuse and sexual misconduct in their denomination it seems like they're starting to link up with each other. And so different things like, they'll go with, the separation of church and state. Well, the separation of church and state does not protect criminal behavior. If the behavior that you are doing is illegal or considered to be a crime, you can still go to jail. You don't get to escape. And so, like my online ministry, I'm not going to quit it. Because I feel good about being able to come before you and bring you this type of information. So, breaking the law. If you're breaking the law, you're not protected. You're not protected constitutionally, and you're not protected biblically. The Word of God talks about the laws of mankind, and I'm going to look that up right now, the law of the land. Now, many people use the law of the land to justify, allow me to say this, Just because something is legal does not necessarily make it biblical. Something can be biblical and not at all be something can be legal and not be biblical. At one point it was perfectly legal to own slaves. So at one point, it was perfectly legal to own black people. At one point, it was perfectly legal to lynch black people. At one point, it was very, it was perfectly legal, or at least not enforceable, not anything that anyone would enforce, for black women to be raped and there be no consequences. So just because something is made legal or illegal, just because something is legal does not necessarily make it okay. So Romans 13. Okay. So this is out of the Amplified. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, granted by his permission and sanction, and those which exist have been put in place by God. Therefore, whoever resists governmental authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who have resisted it will bring judgment, civil penalty on themselves. For civil authorities are not a source of fear for people of good behavior. Let the black people say amen. But for those who do evil, do you want to be unafraid of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive approval and commendation. For the government is God's servant to you for good. But if you do wrong, you should be afraid, for he does not carry the executioner's sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an avenger who brings punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one is subject to civil authorities, not only to escape the punishment that comes with wrongdoing, but as a matter of principle, knowing what is right before God. For this same reason, you pay taxes, for civil authorities are God's servants, devoting themselves to governance. Pay all that is due. Pay to tax to whom is due, customs to whom custom is, and respect to whom, and honor to whom. Owe nothing to anyone except to love and seek the best for one another. For he who unselfishly loves his neighbor has fulfilled the essence of the law. Now, I could go into the rest of it where it talks about the commandments. I'm going to stop right there. Now, verse 10, love does no wrong to a neighbor, never hurts anyone. Therefore, unselfish love is the fulfillment of the law. Now, as born-again Christians, we strive not to break the law. As they said, these laws are how we keep order. So I always find it funny. I remember in the 90s when marital rape was made a crime. And you had all these Christians, especially these white ones, that acted like you shot them in the foot. But I'm like, if you don't rape your wife, why is this a problem? well, women will use that as an excuse to not have sex with us. Well, if you have a wife and she is looking for excuses not to sleep with you, maybe you have a deeper problem than her not wanting to have sex. I always say that, whatever the presenting problem is, if you dig a little deeper, you will find another issue. I remember my first time going to the last church I was at. The pastor asked a question about why a woman would not want to be in the mood. Now, there's a difference between occasional nights off, which I think women are entitled to. So I've heard ridiculousness like 3 times a day. Oh my God, I would die. Okay, unless I had a husband that just kept me in the mood all the time, 3 times a day seems like a lot. And I'm like, why do y'all ask ridiculousness like that? Because you probably can't even get with nobody and get it up that often, okay? And as a woman, I'm not big on acting like I can keep up with something that I can't keep up with. Or guys asking for threesomes. I don't want nobody else in my bed. Nobody. If you have all of that going on, especially if you call yourself a born-again Christian, if you got all that kind of stuff going on, you don't need a wife that's willing to go along with that. You need to see a psychiatrist. There's something wrong, certain acts, there's something wrong with you when you have all of that going on. Okay, you really do. I don't care what nobody says, I'm not doing all of that. Okay, but I thought it was interesting because you just heard the word of God, those who do good. If you are not planning on raping your wife, then nothing should, then it being against the law for you to do so shouldn't give you any problems. But you'd be surprised at the number of church folk, even women. Well, if you were submitting on a regular basis, he would have no reason to force you. He shouldn't force you anyway. Whatever happened to being considerate of your wife? If she's begging for a night off, there's a reason. And some of y'all just, it's not need, it's greed. So let me get into the different things that I want to talk about under the separation of church and state. So the first thing I want to talk about, and all this information is going to be courtesy of Wikipedia. So the first thing I want to talk about is religious freedom. So religious freedom or religious liberty is a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or community in public or private to manifest religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observation. It also includes the freedom to change one's religion or beliefs, the right not to profess any, or the right to not to profess any religion or belief, or not practice of religion as referred to in freedom from religion. Freedom of religion is considered by many people in most nations to be a fundamental human right. In a country with a state religion, freedom of religion is generally considered to mean that the government permits religious practices of other communities beside the state religion and does not persecute believers in other faiths or those who have no religion or have no faith. Freedom of religion goes beyond freedom of belief, which allows the right to believe that a person, group, or religion wishes, but it does not necessarily allow the right to practice the religion or belief openly and outwardly in a public manner, which some believe is a central facet of religious freedom. Freedom of religion is uncertain, but may be considered to fall between the two terms. The term belief is considered inclusive of all forms of irreligion, including atheism, humanism, existentialism, or other schools of thought. Whether non-believers or humanists would be considered for the purpose of freedom of religion is a contested question in legal and constitutional context. Crucial in the consideration of this liberty is whether or not religious practices and motivated actions would otherwise violate secular law, which would violate secular law, should be permitted due to the safeguarding freedom of religion as in American jurisprudence. United States versus Reynolds, or Wisconsin versus Yoder. Okay. Now we're going to talk about religious discrimination. So religious discrimination is treating a person or group differently because of the particular beliefs they hold about a religion. This includes instances where adherents of different religions, denominations, or non-religions are treated unequally due to their particular beliefs, either by the law or an institutional setting such as employment or housing. So basically, it would be like not employing someone because they are Muslim or Christian because of their religious beliefs. Religious discrimination is related to religious persecution, the most extreme forms of which would include instances in which people have been executed for beliefs which have been perceived to be heretical. Laws that carry only light punishments are considered as mild forms of religious persecution or religious discrimination. So I brought up the whole bombing abortion clinic thing because right before I became a born-again Christian, there were a series of people who were bombing abortion clinics. I don't believe in bombing abortion clinics at all. I don't believe in it. It's murder. I don't believe that God is using murder to correct murder. So we're going to go into religious persecution. Now, persecution is the systematic mistreatment of an individual or group of individuals as a response to their religious beliefs or affiliations or lack thereof. The tendency of societies or groups within societies to alienate or repress different subcultures is a recurring theme in human history. Moreover, because, the people who came, there were people, the the Pilgrims and Quakers and Amish and different people who came over here because of what they call the Anabaptist movement is a form of people being persecuted because, at the time, everybody was brought out of the Catholic Church where they believed in baptizing infants. And so there's the whole thing with Martin Luther teaching that baptism was supposed to happen at a later date when a person could make. That's where you hear religions talk about the age of accountability and the ability, because an infant doesn't know about sin. Very few babies know about sin. And of course, there are people, just the sinfulness of being born in this flesh, and, we understand all that. But, he came across the scriptures because at the time, these scriptures were being made available to the common man and just not the priest. And so that's where you get, people, the Anabaptist movement, and many of the people left and came over here. And ironically, many of those people that left and came over here would become part of the Underground Railroad, believe it or not. Because just like they were persecuted in their own country, which was largely England, they came over here to get away from religious persecution, and largely a part of why we have laws that protect people's freedom to worship however they choose to worship. Now, you can research that a little bit more deeply if you want to, but because of time constraints, I'm not going to. Now, moreover, because a person's religion frequently determines his or her sense of morality, worldview, and self image, attitudes toward other, and overall personal identity, to a significant extent, religious differences can be significant cultural, personal and social factors. Religious persecution may be triggered by religious bigotry, just like every other form of bigotry. When members of a dominant group denigrate religions other than their own. It's also extreme xenophobia as well. It may be triggered by the state when it views a particular religious group as a threat to its interests. So that's that. So I'm going to skip down here and go into separation of church and state, which is the main reason that I am talking tonight. So the separation of church and state is a philosophical and jurisprudential concept for defining political distance between and the relationship between religious organizations and the state. So the state would basically be the government or the secular government. Conceptually, the term refers to the creation of a secular state or without legally explicit church-state separation and to de-establishment, the changing of an existent formal relationship between the church and the state. Although the concept is older, the exact phrase separation of church and state is derived from Wallace separation between church and state, a term that was coined by Thomas Jefferson. The concept was promoted by Enlightenment philosophers such as John Locke. In a society where the degree of political separation between the church and state is determined by the legal structure and prevalent legal views that define the proper relationship between organized religion and the state, the arm's length principle proposes a relationship where within the two principal entities. So let's say you belong to a church that believes in correcting lesbians by raping them. That would not be protected. And it would not be protected because rape is a crime. It's a felony. So forcing women to have sex with you is a crime. It is a criminal act. And so it is therefore not protected. So let me get so if you're in a church that keeps trying to tell you that certain behavior is okay to do because the separation of church and state. Let's say you have a church that has a problem with human trafficking. So a church that, is trying to coerce women into prostitution, and I know of a particular denomination that does that. That is not protected because prostitution in many states is still illegal and considered to be a criminal act, and trafficking is a criminal act. Now you have people who are going into decriminalizing behavior. I, for one, am not really big on decriminalization on certain things. I would have to look that up a little bit further to go into it. So right now I'm at, 30 minutes into this. Let me look here. And so, like I said, I'm going to continue on to this. Now, there's also the concept of women's rights, at which I'm going to go into probably this Wednesday or Friday. Wednesdays I like to use as updates for whatever I'm going to do over the weekend, which starts Friday. So I'm going to continue on this topic this coming Friday. Because I really want to talk more about this, because you have churches that are pleading, well, separation of church and state, okay, but you can't violate the rights of your members. Okay, if you cannot abuse your members. Domestic violence is a crime still. I personally believe that it should stay a crime, because we took so many years to get the legal system to pay attention to the rights of victims, which are primarily women, that now decriminalizing it, well, what do you plan to do? Well, rehabilitation. You can criminalize it and still keep rehabilitation but my thing is this, because you have a few, idiots that will just say, well, it's not a crime anymore, so I can go ahead and beat my wife, because you have people who think that way. But, I want to make it plain that if your pastor is asking you to do things that are against the law, you have the right to tell him no. If you're married and you are under a church that, is preaching submission, and your husband is asking you to break the law or sin against God, you have a right to tell him no. And I'm going to go deeper into that this coming Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and get off here. It's been about a half hour. I don't want to belabor this, but just know that you are protected not only under the law, you're also protected by God. If it's spelled out that it's a sin, then you know that God ain't in it. And I will say again, your attacks on these single moms is demonic. So I'm gonna go ahead and get off here. I have some things that I'm trying to get squared away this week. And I'll talk about that later. So you guys be good. I will talk to you later. Have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your rest of your week, and I will see you guys. I will see you guys either Wednesday night or possibly. I know for a fact I will see you guys on Friday night for certain. But I may get back on here Wednesday just to kind of give some updates. So I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.